Mark Johnson was born on April 18, 1881. Most known for his role as the native chief in the adventure horror classic King Kong, though some eagle-eyed horror enthusiasts will recognize him from the Universal monster movie The Mummy a year before. He was the first black man to write and produce a screenplay, and may have been the first and only black man to be a lead actor in a Hollywood silent-era film. He founded a black worker-owned company. He was an independent artist, an actor, producer, and more. And yet a large chunk of his legacy goes ignored. Noble was born in Colorado Springs in 1881 to Perry J. and Georgia Johnson, along with his younger brother George. Noble's father was a nationally recognized horse trainer and breeder. Horse racing and betting started a modest fortune for the family. After basic schooling, George would go on to attend Hampton University, while at 15, Noble would drop out of school and join his father for 2 seasons on the horse racing circuit, making friends with local ranchers, and sources say he even became quite a boxer. But eventually, in 1898, at the age of 17, Noble Johnson would become a cowboy. He would reportedly travel across Colorado, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, and even Canada. But in June of 1909, Noble would return home to Colorado Springs, unsure about his future. Whenever you hear people talk about Noble Johnson's first role, you'll get something like, legend has it Noble landed his first role because he was on a set for an unnamed western that needed horses, and he just so happened to be the handler. The director asked Johnson to stand in as a Native American because the previous actor had gotten injured. A partial list of Noble's appearances confirms that his first film was Eagle's Nest in 1915, where he is listed as Indian character. But that's not really how it happened. There's little evidence to suggest Noble was ever a horse handler on the Eagle's Nest. According to Henry T. Sampson in Blacks in Black and White, a source book on black films, one of the only places with first-person sources attributed to Noble, Sampson explains a much more traditional approach. The company went word to Colorado Springs for a replacement. Noble was recommended, applied, and was employed. It might sound like a small detail, or something lost in translation, but it's important, because historically it would fit conveniently into a theater promoter's narrative if a white director was fundamentally handpicking Noble for the audience to consume. At the time of Johnson's film debut, segregation and Jim Crow laws were established and growing in the United States, subjugating black people to discrimination and forms of slavery that were supposed to be abolished. It was common for folk stories to circulate on how actors of color got parts, either by making it seem like luck or indoctrination, to make them palatable for uneasy racist viewers to enjoy the movie while black people were on the screen. But doing this, either as intended or as a side effect, erases the person behind the characters and transforms the actor into being a prop, insinuating that Noble's career began at random and moves essential information from his career. He was a human being with motives for wanting to be in front of the camera just like anyone else. By blurring the lines between reality and what people were comfortable with at the time, many of his biggest contributions to film history were buried to time. Noble Johnson's beginning in acting was far from a coincidence, and in fact, he wanted to pave the way for people of color to be a part of moving pictures, a medium that took off and made a cultural impact almost as soon as it was introduced, yet kept black people in its periphery. He aimed to have a respectable space for black people in movies that didn't involve making a fool of himself or conforming to mainstream white audiences, even if that meant he had to make the space himself. In 1916, a year after his film debut and before any work with Universal, Noble, his brother, early filmmaker Clarence Brooks, as well as pharmacist James T. Smith, finalized and founded their own studio called the Lincoln Motion Picture Company, with $75,000 to the company's funding. This was in response to the group having a deep understanding of where things were headed racially in Hollywood, and their desire to make black films. In 1917, the influential newspaper The Chicago Defender reported, "There is only one race film company worthy of that name, and that is the Lincoln Motion Picture Company, Incorporated, of Los Angeles, California. It is distinctly a racial proposition, owned, operated, and financed by our people only, not a white person even being allowed to own a share of stock. There's no use talking. They will all have to take their hats off to the Lincoln Company. Their features are so far superior to all the other all-colored productions that there is absolutely no comparison." The company's first films would be exactly what they promised. Racially charged pieces that combated the norms at the time, placing black people front and center as the main characters. But they had to confront something first. D.W. Griffith's 1915, thoroughly racist, white savior suck-off called A Birth of a Nation. Adapted from a book originally titled The Klansman, it was multiple hours of unashameful depictions of manifest destiny, the white man's burden, and the ideology of white supremacy. I cannot stress how abhorrent this film is, through the depiction and the ideology it expresses and glorifies. Studies have now even concluded that in major places where the film was shown, the KKK is still more likely to have active members and factions. The amount of damage done by this film is only beginning to be studied, and when everything clears, I don't think we'll be surprised, but definitely ashamed of what is found. In response to the release of the film, the Lincoln Motion Picture Company made a film in 1916 called The Realization of an Ambition. This was a 20-minute film starring Noble Johnson, Clarence Brooks, Dudley Brooks, Dula Hall, and Lottie Bowles. It depicted a black man named James Burton leaving his home to try to make his own way, only to apply to an oil company and be turned down because of his race. He spies a runaway horse carriage and gets on horseback to stop it. It just so happened to be the daughter of the oil company's president, and he gives Burton a job out of gratitude. Then, James Burton works his way up to get his own drilling site and rig, making him rich. This film showcased the American dream myth, but for a black audience, a message that was widely accepted by the newly growing black middle class of the time. Noble would produce this film as well as star in it. Realization would get a screening at the 20th annual meeting of the National Business League founded by Booker T. Washington. The film had 4 prints made of it, which as the company's hit movie were available for rent for screenings and were rented out. 2 of the prints were bought outright, but none have ever surfaced. In 1916, Noble would star in The Lady from the Sea. This would be Noble's first time in a lead role outside of the Lincoln Company, as the Islander, likely making him the first black male lead in Hollywood history. The short story involves a woman and dog getting shipwrecked on an island, where the Islander finds her and tries to help before she gets scared and runs away. Eventually, a passing ship finds her, and the short ends with the dog running off the ship and being happily accepted by the Islander. There's no surviving footage of this movie I could find. The following year, in 1917, Noble would star in the Lincoln Motion Picture Company's second feature, Trooper of Troop K, which told the story of Shiftless Joe, a down-on-his-luck man who lost his job, played by Johnson. A friendly woman named Clara Holmes, played by Beulah Hall, has faith in him and tries to help Joe out despite ridicule from her neighbors. Shiftless Joe enlists in the military, where he gets promised good meals and good clothing. Joe gets placed into Company K and starts fighting on the Mexican-American border. He maintains his rather rough exterior, but gains the love of his captains and fellow cavalrymen. Company K gets sent to the Mexican city of Carrizal, where Joe stands out and aids in an American retreat, saving many lives and even personally saving his captain, creating the iconic poster image. Shiftless Joe then returns home as a hero, with Clara waiting to embrace him. Noble would part ways with the company that he helped found on September 3, 1918, after promoters began to complain to Universal about the Lincoln Motion Picture Company and how they were portraying their actors as prominent black stars. Producers also began to weigh on Johnson specifically as the company's breakout star. Producers were used to paying minorities severely less than white actors and actresses, and Johnson's popularity as a race actor threatened that model. Universal worked Johnson into a deal where he needed to give more of his time to them, And as the functioning head of the Lincoln Company, he had to make the decision. In a telegram dated July 1st, Noble would write, "Nothing personal. Will retain my interest in the firm, but cannot devote time to the business necessary for its success. Hence my resignation, which will afford the vacancy for someone more efficient and capable and with more business experience." The Lincoln Motion Picture Company would close in 1923 due to underinvestment and slow bookings. The rise of race films that were funded by white studios with the aim of indoctrination into white society would also aid in the decline. During an interview, George Johnson would comment on his brother in the Lincoln Motion Picture Company. "Oh, in the Lincoln Company he played naturally. He didn't need any makeup, no. Of course, we were featuring films. That was our business. But he got into pictures accidentally and made good. He got in all those big pictures, but he didn't get in there he got in there as an actor." There are only 2 films of a speculated 5 to 7 made by the Lincoln Motion Picture Company currently surviving. You and I are going to take a second and watch what is probably the last surviving footage from the company. Due to Johnson's popularity and potential, Universal Pictures would not allow him to make personal appearances at film screenings, theaters, or college talks. This would hinder his popularity and keep him in a subservient role to the promoters. It's important to say this because without that hindering, it might have been possible that he would have been the first nationally recognized black actor. In 1917, only a year into Johnson's acting career, he would hold the role of Native Chief while working under Universal Pictures. I bring this up because despite being an African American, most of his parts at the height of his career in the 1930s and 40s would require him to play any race that has a skin pigment under a certain level, including Hispanic, Portuguese, Arabic, Asian, Native American, and many more. When asked about his brother's race ambiguity in roles, George said, "At Universal, out of 50 pictures, I don't think he played a part in more than about 3. As a great makeup artist, he made up as an Indian or a West Indian or a South American, or pretty near anything they wanted to make up." Noble experimented with camera and cinematic makeup, as black faces tended to wash out easier on film stocks and in photography, something that was overlooked and often used against darker-skinned actors and actresses. As well as his contributions to movie history, Johnson is a really good actor with a lot of screen presence, and his career isn't short of memorable performances. In 1922, Noble played the role of Friday in The Adventures of Robinson Crusoe, a quite popular silent TV series based on the 1719 novel, which, despite still being extremely problematic, was one of the earliest instances of a minority character in a major role being portrayed positively in TV serials, even if it was just as Robinson's companion. It's a far reach from the films Johnson and the Lincoln Motion Picture Company produced, but it did indicate a positive direction for Noble's popularity and his position at Universal. The series itself has been lost to time, and mostly just production stills and promotional materials remain. In 1932, Noble would get a featured role in the original Mummy. He doesn't speak much in this role, but in every single scene, he just looks like he's about to snap. It gave me the impression that he didn't really care if Imhotep used the mind control ring or not. He would have just joined them to get away from these idiots. Also in 1932, Johnson played Ivan in The Most Dangerous Game, the servant of Count Zarov. Johnson's intimidating stare and massive posture gave him an amazing bodyguard presence. Noble Johnson held one of the longest Hollywood careers at the time, spanning from 1915 to 1950. He would retire and live out the rest of his life until 96, where on January 9th, 1978, he would die of natural causes and be laid to rest in San Bernardino County, California. His work as a character actor painted a portrait of a stoic, unknown figure, showing up and disappearing at a glance, while being a reminder or a staple of the other, which Hollywood was trying to portray. As times change, people get aware and interested in things that were taken for granted, but sometimes time's fire burns too quickly for us to pick up the pieces. And many of what I would consider to be Noble's most interesting, profound, or complex roles have already been lost to time. And the reality is, we might never be able to truly appreciate Johnson as an actor or a director because of these now charred segments of our history. I'm grateful for the segments we have left, but knowing the gaps in what has been there is infuriating and depressing. But the search for Noble Johnson's work and the work of the Lincoln Motion Picture Company isn't over, and there are historians, professors, students, and everyday people trying to find the relics of the films and stories that got away. But for now, Johnson's career may feel like watching a riddle, one that you had to be alive to truly witness, and have more context to truly understand.